More than 12 hours later, at 5:53 a.m., response crews secure a boom around the ship. 12 hours later. 12 and a half to be exact. Now, if that's what this government calls world-class response, world-class oil emergency preparedness, which is what the Conservatives have consistently said through all of the debates on these pipelines on the West Coast, don't worry, Canadians, don't worry, British Columbians, we have world-class systems. Well, that was a world-class lie. Because what we see in reality with an incident that happens in the immediate vicinity of the city of Vancouver, some millions of people located right there, all these ships and supposed equipment ready to handle this kind of thing. That's where the cleanup services are. It takes them 12 and a half hours to show up and put a boom around it. Now, the tragedy with not only this type of spill, but also importantly all the millions and millions of barrels of bitumen the government would like to move through our waters, is that much of it sinks. So the securing of booms is only one small and partial measure. But anyone who wants to note that this is a cleanup operation, in the sense that things are cleaned up after the fact, should dissuade themselves of that idea. Because a 5 to 10% recovery is typical in a diluted bitumen spill. 5 to 10% recovery, and they'll call that cleanup. Now, I got little kids, and if I asked them to clean up their room, and I came in and they'd cleaned up somewhere between 5 and 10% of their room, and they said, "Dad, we're done," I would suggest all parents would say, "Not yet, kids, that's not cleaned up. Let's get the rest of the 90% done." Now, that's a child's room, and we can laugh about that. But when you're talking about 95% of all the oil spilled out of one of these incidents going into our environment, embedding itself on our shores, within the fish, within our ecosystems, the impacts not only on the environment, but on our economy, as we saw on the Gulf Coast and we saw in the Valdez spill in Alaska, north of where I live, can be devastating. And we know that this is an accident, but yet an accident almost prescribed in the way that we deal with it. That a government that consistently tears up environmental laws, downgrades and guts the environmental protections within the Fisheries Act, the Navigable Waters Act, and on, and then further compounds the problem by not only stealing away our legal protections, but then goes further and makes cuts to the very services that we need. And tomorrow, these guys are going to present this balanced budget. And you're going to say, well, how'd you get there? This is how you get there. This is how they chose to get there, is by cutting the basic protections that Canadians need. The former base commander who operated Kitsilano Coast Guard, Commander Moxie, said that if the Kitsilano Coast Guard, which had a ship that did this exact thing, were available and ready, which it would have been if you don't shut the base, 6 minutes, he figures we could have got there. The Conservatives' response, 12 and a half hours till a boom shows up. This is what they think is protection. And you could only wonder in the even election and everybody's starting to position themselves, particularly in British Columbia, only a government of complete arrogance and taking a people entirely for granted would suggest to British Columbians who deeply care about our coast and the protection of that coast, not just for us but for all Canadians, that a government only taking people for granted would make these very measures that the government does. This is a wake-up call, Mr. Speaker. This was a spill, and it's an important spill, yet in a global scale and what is projected, the threats posed by the Conservatives and their friends in the oil patch would be a minor one compared to the spills you would experience from a much larger ship. And if this doesn't wake the government up, like the Auditor General's report didn't wake them up, like the private members' bills we move in here doesn't wake them up, like the polling, like the people of British Columbia can't wake these guys up, then there's a date coming in the near future, in the fall of 2015, where people in BC and right across this country will not only wake them up, they're going to toss them out. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.